The air in the Vance Tower boardroom was worth more per cubic foot than the real estate it occupied, and it was just as cold. At the head of the table, Alistair Vance, a man who saw the world as a series of assets to be acquired, pointed a gold pen at the projection. The Q3 synergy projections for the Helios acquisition are soft. I want them hardened by morning. Make it happen. The order, devoid of any human warmth, was directed at his daughter, Clara. She sat opposite him, a ghost in a power suit. She nodded, her expression a carefully constructed mask of compliance. Inside, she was suffocating. For 10 years, her life had been a series of acquisitions. The right schools, the right connections, the right career path, all designed to mold her into the perfect successor. She looked at the faces around the table, men and women twice her age, their ambition a tangible, hungry force. They didn't see her, they saw a name, a conduit to power. That evening, the city lights blurred into a meaningless tapestry from her penthouse window. Her father's voice from the meeting echoed in her mind. Make it happen. It was the mantra of her existence. But as the rain began its descent, streaking down the floor-to-ceiling windows, a different thought, a quiet rebellion began to bloom in the barren soil of her heart. What if I didn't? The thought was a key turning a lock she didn't know existed. She walked out of the Vance Tower, not into the waiting black car with its silent, imposing driver, but into the rain-soaked anonymity of the crowd. It was a baptism and an escape. In a defiant, desperate act, she slipped her smartphone, the digital leash that tied her to her father, into an overflowing trash can. Her wallet, a symbol of a power she no longer wanted, was left on a wet park bench. And then she just walked. She walked for hours, letting the city's rhythm pull her further from her gilded cage. The designer storefronts of the financial district bled into the brick-faced warehouses of the industrial zone, and the cold neon signs eventually faded into the warm, yellow glow of apartment windows in neighborhoods she'd only ever seen from the sky. The rain fell harder, a relentless downpour that plastered her silk blouse to her skin and washed away the last vestiges of the woman she was supposed to be. Shivering, lost, and stripped of every tool she'd ever used to navigate the world, she finally huddled under the awning of a closed butcher shop. Cars hissed by, their headlights indifferent to the lone, drenched figure. This was a new kind of poverty, not of the wallet, but of the soul. She had erased herself, but she had no idea who to become. A voice, calm and steady as the earth, cut through the downpour. That's a rough night to be without an umbrella. She looked up. A man stood there, holding a large, patched-up umbrella that had clearly seen better days. He wasn't looking at her with pity, but with a simple, direct concern that felt more foreign than the strange streets around her. He wore a worn jacket, and his hands were calloused, the lines on his palms etched with dirt. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice trembling with cold and exhaustion. He offered a small, knowing smile that reached his tired eyes. "Fine is usually what people say when they're the opposite. Look, I run the community garden just around the corner. We have a greenhouse with a heater and a kettle. At the very least, you can get dry and warm." He gestured with his head. "I'm Marcus, by the way." Clara hesitated. Every instinct her privileged life had taught her screamed danger. Strangers were risks to be managed, not trusted. But the exhaustion in her bones was heavier than her fear. She looked at his eyes again. There was no angle, no agenda, just kindness. She gave a single defeated nod. He led her through a gate in a chain-link fence, and suddenly the city's concrete jungle gave way to a small, defiant patch of green. Even in the dark, she could smell the rich, damp earth and the sweet scent of wet mint leaves. He unlocked the door to a large greenhouse, its plastic walls glowing from a single string of lights inside. A small boy, no older than 7, was asleep on a cot in the corner, a book about planets resting on his chest, rising and falling with his steady breaths. "That's Leo, my son," he whispered, handing her a rough but clean towel. "The kettle's over there. Tea bags are in the kin. Help yourself. Bathroom's the small shed out back." He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask why a woman in a ruined silk blouse was wandering his neighborhood at midnight. He simply gave her a space to exist, a pocket of warmth in a world that had suddenly become cold and vast. As Clara wrapped her shaking hands around a warm mug of chamomile tea, she watched the rain patter against the roof. For the first time all night, she took a breath that didn't feel like it was being stolen from her. She was nobody here, and it was the most freeing feeling she had ever known.
Clara woke to the sound of a small voice humming a tuneless, happy song. She sat up, disoriented, the scratchy wool blanket a stark contrast to her usual 1,000-thread-count sheets. Marcus's son, Leo, sat on the floor, carefully watering a tiny seedling in a pot with a miniature watering can. He looked up at her with wide, curious brown eyes. "Dad said a rain-washed lady was sleeping here," he said, matter-of-factly. "Are you a mermaid? Your hair is the color of sand." Clara couldn't help but let out a small, rusty laugh. "No, not a mermaid, just washed up." Marcus entered from the garden, his boots muddy, a gentle smile on his face. He handed her a simple breakfast, a hard-boiled egg from their own chickens, and a thick slice of homemade bread with honey. "Leo has an active imagination," he said. "He thinks the zucchinis are secret alien spaceships." "Feeling better?" "Yes, much better. Thank you," Clara said, her voice quiet. I don't have any way to pay you for this." Marcus shrugged, grabbing a pair of worn leather gardening gloves. "Kindness doesn't have a price tag. But," he added, looking at her thoughtfully, "if you're planning on sticking around until you get on your feet, I can't turn down an extra pair of hands. The weeds are staging a hostile takeover, and I'm losing the war." She looked down at her own hands, manicured, soft, and utterly useless. She had managed billion-dollar portfolios, but she had never pulled a weed in her life. The thought was terrifying, and yet a strange spark of possibility ignited within her. A chance to build something not with capital, but with her own 2 hands. "Okay," she said, surprising herself. "I can work." The first day was a lesson in profound humility. The foreign tools felt awkward in her grip. Her back screamed in protest after an hour of hunching over a bed of carrots. She was introduced to the other gardeners, a mosaic of the neighborhood. There was Mrs. Gable, a sharp-eyed retiree who watched her with skepticism, and a young couple, Maria and Sam, who were trying to teach their toddler the difference between a tomato and a rock. They were all friendly, but Clara felt like an alien, her speech too formal, her movements too hesitant. By noon, she had mistakenly pulled up an entire row of young beets, thinking they were weeds. Leo gently pointed out her mistake. "It's okay," he said seriously. "Beets are sneaky. They look like weeds on purpose to test you." Humiliation burned her cheeks. She wanted to quit, to dissolve back into the rain. But then Marcus came over, not with criticism, but with a bottle of water. "The first rule of the garden," he said gently, "is that everything that grows requires patience, including the gardeners." The days that followed were slow, painful, and beautiful rewiring of her entire being. She learned the simple, rhythmic therapy of labor, the satisfaction of clearing a patch of stubborn ivy, the quiet pride of seeing a row of lettuce she had planted herself begin to sprout. She learned the names of the people who worked alongside her, heard their stories, and began to feel the intricate root system of their community. Mrs. Gable eventually showed her a special way to tie up tomato vines, a small gesture that felt like a monumental acceptance. One afternoon, she watched Marcus struggling with their outdated inventory system, a messy, coffee-stained notebook. "Let me see that," she said. In a few hours, using the garden's ancient, slow laptop, she designed a simple but brilliant spreadsheet system that tracked planting schedules, harvests, and distribution to the local food bank. It even created a volunteer schedule. Marcus watched over her shoulder, amazed. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, his voice full of genuine awe. "I took a class once," she mumbled, the understatement feeling both dishonest and necessary. He just nodded, a new look of respect in his eyes. "You're full of surprises, Clara." That evening, a fragile peace settled over the garden. The work was done, and a few of the gardeners lingered, sharing a simple meal. Leo was showing Clara his prized possession, a worn-out book on astronomy. "This one is Jupiter. It has a giant red storm, like it's angry all the time." Sometimes things that look angry are just protecting something vulnerable inside, Clara found herself saying, the words coming from a place she didn't know she had. Marcus, who had been listening, caught her eye. "You're good with him," he said quietly, after Leo had run off to chase fireflies. "He lost his mom a few years ago. It's just been us. He doesn't open up to everyone." The unspoken vulnerability in his voice made something in Clara's chest ache. "He's an amazing kid," she said softly. "You're a good father." "I try," he said, his gaze distant. "This garden, it was my wife's dream. After she was gone, it was the only thing that made sense. Planting something, watching it grow. It's an act of hope." He looked at her then, a real, searching look. "You never told me what you were running from." Clara watched Leo, his small form a silhouette of pure joy against the twilight sky. "I wasn't running from something," she replied, the truth finally clear in her own mind. "I was running to something. I just didn't know what it was until I got here." Her gaze met his, and in that moment, she felt a connection that was more real and grounding than anything her old life had ever offered her. It wasn't about romance. It was about recognition. He saw her. Not an asset, not a name, but the woman who was finally learning to grow.
Their fragile world was shattered a week later. Two men in sharp suits, their polished Italian shoes looking alien on the dirt path, walked into the garden as if they owned it. They unrolled a blueprint on a picnic table, their voices loud and dismissive. "This entire block is slated for redevelopment," the lead man, a slick developer named Henderson, announced to the small group of gardeners. "We're putting up a luxury condo tower, the urban oasis. We're prepared to make a generous offer for you to vacate the lease immediately." Marcus stood before them, his posture as unyielding as an old oak tree. "This land isn't for sale. It feeds over 50 families. It's an outdoor classroom for the local school. It's the heart of this neighborhood." Henderson laughed, a condescending, ugly sound that grated on the peaceful air. "A heart doesn't generate profit, pal. You have 30 days until the official eviction notice is served. After that, our offer goes down. I suggest you take the deal." Clara watched from the greenhouse, her heart pounding in her throat. She saw the quiet fury in Marcus's jaw, the fierce protectiveness in his stance as he shielded his community from these predators. He didn't have money or power, but he had a conviction that made him seem 10 feet tall. He was fighting for something real. As the developers left, a black car pulled up to the curb. A man in a driver's cap stepped out and approached the garden, his eyes scanning the area until they locked on Clara. He held up a tablet. Her face was on the screen, under a headline from a financial newspaper. "Billionaire heiress Clara Vance missing for weeks. Vance Industries stock dips." Her blood ran cold. The man was her father's private investigator. Before she could react, another car, sleek, black, and imposing, arrived. The back door opened, and her father, Alistair Vance, stepped out. He surveyed the garden with an expression of pure disgust, his gaze finally landing on Clara, her hands dirty, her clothes smudged with soil, her face pale with shock. "There you are," he said, his voice as cold and sharp as breaking glass. "Your little vacation is over. Get in the car." Marcus and the other gardeners stared, stunned into silence. Mrs. Gable's mouth hung open. "Clara Vance?" Marcus whispered, the name sounding foreign and impossible. Clara felt the color drain from her face. The two worlds she had tried so desperately to keep separate had just collided with catastrophic force. "Dad, please," she stammered. "Don't do this here!" "I will not, please," Alistair snapped, his voice cutting through the quiet garden. "I have spent a fortune looking for you, only to find you playing peasant in a dirt patch with him." He gave Marcus a dismissive glare that sized him up and found him worthless. "Do you have any idea the damage you've done to the company's image? The markets thrive on stability. Your little stunt has cost us millions." "This isn't about the company," Clara shot back, finding a sliver of courage. "This is my life." "This is not a life," he retorted, gesturing around at the vibrant, thriving garden as if it were a landfill. "This is a temporary rebellion, a fantasy. Now you will come home, or I will personally finance that man's," he nodded to where Henderson had stood, "entire condo project. I'll have this little slum bulldozed by Monday. Your choice." The threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Clara looked at Marcus, his face a storm of shock, betrayal, and hurt. She looked at the faces of the community members who had welcomed her. She looked at Leo, who was hiding behind his father's legs, his eyes wide with fear. Her father had her in a checkmate. To save the garden, she had to sacrifice herself. Tears streamed down her face as she walked towards the car. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she whispered as she passed him, not daring to meet his eyes. He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm before falling back to his side. "Clara!" She didn't stop. She couldn't. The door of the black car slammed shut, a sound of finality, and as it pulled away, she watched the garden, her sanctuary, her home, disappear in the rear-view mirror. The glass cage was the same, but now it felt infinitely smaller. Clara was a ghost in her own life, a prisoner moving through rooms filled with priceless art and empty memories. Her father had her under constant watch, assigning a security detail and cutting off her communication. He thought he had won. He thought by putting her back in her gilded cage, she would remember who she was supposed to be. But all she could think about was the feel of rich soil in her hands, the sound of Leo's laughter as he discovered a ladybug, and the quiet strength in Marcus's eyes. Her father had been wrong. The garden wasn't a fantasy. This life, this silent, opulent prison, was the fantasy. The garden was real. Love wasn't weakness, it was courage. She found her opening one evening. Her father was hosting a massive fundraising gala, a glittering affair full of fake smiles and ruthless ambition. Dressed in a designer gown that felt like a costume, she looked the part of the dutiful heiress. But underneath the silken diamonds, a plan, forged in the quiet desperation of the last week, was ready. She excused herself, saying she felt unwell, and slipped away to her father's home office. His private server was the heart of his empire. She had built half its security protocols. She knew its secret passages. She wasn't looking for money to steal. She was looking for leverage. And she found it. A file buried deep, detailing a series of unethical acquisitions, including the very development company threatening Marcus's garden. Henderson's project was being funded through a shell corporation to avoid city environmental regulations. Regulations the garden land was specifically protected by, if only someone with the right resources knew where to look. Armed with encrypted copies of the files, she made one anonymous call to her father's biggest rival and another to the city's most tenacious investigative reporter. Then,
she walked back into the gala. She found her father holding court with Henderson himself. "Clara," her father said, beaming, trying to display a united front. "Come and say hello to Mr. Henderson. He's the visionary behind the new Oasis Tower." Clara faced them both, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the sudden hush in the room. "Mr. Henderson, I believe your urban oasis project is about to run into some significant legal and financial trouble. A violation of Municipal Code 74B, I believe. You might want to check the morning news." Henderson paled. Her father's smile vanished, replaced by a cold mask of fury. "What did you do?" he seethed, his voice a low growl. "I chose a side," Clara said, her voice ringing with newfound power that turned every head in the room. "You taught me that every asset has a value, Dad. But you never taught me that some things, like community, kindness, and hope, are priceless. I'm choosing a legacy of growth, not greed. A home built from the ground up, not one that bulldozes over others." She turned and walked out of the party, a queen, abdicating a corrupt throne. She left a stunned silence in her wake. She didn't look back. For the second time in a month, she was walking away from her father's world. But this time, she wasn't running away from anything. She was walking toward home.
The knock on the greenhouse door came just after dawn. Marcus was inside, staring at the official eviction notice that had been served the day before, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He opened the door, ready to face another bad day, and froze. Clara stood there, not the heiress in the designer clothes, but the woman he knew, wearing a simple pair of jeans and a hoodie. She was holding 2 cups of coffee from the corner deli. "I brought a peace offering," she said softly, "and a copy of a court-filed injunction. Henderson's project is dead. The land is protected." Marcus stared at her speechless, taking in the impossible sight of her. He took the coffee, his fingers brushing against hers. "Clara, how? Why?" "Because you showed me what it means to fight for something," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You and Leo, this place, you're my home. I was just too scared to fight for it before. I'm not scared anymore. If you'll still have me." He searched her face, and all the hurt and betrayal he'd felt washed away, replaced by something deep and overwhelming. He saw the truth of her words, the strength she had found. "We're not rich," he said, his voice thick with emotion, stating the obvious because it was the only barrier he could imagine. "I've had rich," she replied, stepping closer until only inches separated them. "What you have here, this is wealth." A small voice interrupted them. "Clara!" Leo ran from the garden path and threw his arms around her legs, burying his face in her jeans. "You came back! I told Dad you would. Did you remember you're not a mermaid?" Clara knelt down and hugged him tightly, laughing through her tears. "I remembered something better, Leo. I remembered who I want to be." She looked up with Marcus over Leo's head. He was smiling, a real, radiant smile that reached his eyes and erased all the hardship from his face.
The sign at the gate now read Green Haven Community Gardens. A new, larger greenhouse, funded by an anonymous donation to a new city trust Clara had established, stood at the back. Clara, her hands comfortably smudged with dirt, was laughing as she helped Mrs. Gable judge a funniest-looking vegetable contest. She moved with an easy confidence, greeting people by name, a vital part of the community she had fought to save. Leo was proudly showing a group of children his worm farm, a project he and Clara had started together. Marcus came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He kissed her cheek, his touch warm and familiar. "Having fun, boss?" he teased. Clara leaned back against him, breathing in the scent of soil, grilled corn, and happiness. She watched the community she was now a part of, a vibrant, messy, beautiful family. She had traded a corner office for an endless sky, a billion-dollar inheritance for a share in something priceless. She was no longer a rain-washed lady or a missing heiress. She was just Clara, and she was finally, truly home.
We hope Clara's journey reminded you of the power of kindness. If it resonated with you, show your support by giving this video a like, comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe to Moments of Heartfelt Emotions so you don't miss our next story of the human spirit.